My parents bought my brother a brand new car for his graduation, but I only got a ticket. Max and Ethan were twins, but they might as well have been from different worlds. Ethan was the golden boy, the pride of their small town, the star quarterback who could do no wrong. At every game, the stands erupted when he took the field, the crowd chanting his name like he was some kind of deity. Coaches praised him, scouts circled like vultures, and their parents, well, their parents practically worshipped him. Max, on the other hand, was invisible. From the time they were little, it was always Ethan who got the attention, Ethan who got the praise, Ethan who their parents planned their lives around. Every conversation at dinner revolved around his training schedule, his latest game, his future scholarship. Their mother fussed over his diet, making sure he had the right balance of proteins and carbs. Their father spent hours in the backyard with him, perfecting his throws, his stance, his speed. Max? He didn't get meal plans. He got whatever scraps were left over. No one asked about his day. No one cared how school was going for him. He wasn't a football player, so he wasn't important. It wasn't just about sports. Their parents made it clear that Ethan was the future of the family. They believed in him, invested in him, boasted about him to anyone who would listen. Max was nothing more than a shadow in his own home. When it came time for college applications, Ethan's were a family project. Their parents stayed up late with him, helping him refine his essays, paying for tutors, making calls to coaches and admissions officers. His applications were sent off with hopeful anticipation, the whole family on edge, waiting for that acceptance letter. Max? He filled his out alone. No one proofread them. No one asked if he needed help. When he got into a decent college, his parents barely looked up from the dinner table. "That's nice, honey," his mother said, already shifting the conversation back to Ethan's upcoming game. They never asked how Max planned to pay for school. So he got a job. A miserable, back-breaking job at a warehouse, working night shifts just to scrape together what little he could. He came home exhausted, covered in sweat and dust, and no one noticed. They were too busy talking about Ethan's latest win. The few times Max tried to bring up his own struggles, his parents dismissed him. "Ethan has a real future ahead of him," his father would say. "We need to focus on that." It wasn't fair, but fairness didn't exist in their family. There was only one person who saw Max, his grandfather. Old, frail, but sharp as ever, his grandfather would sit with him on the porch after long shifts and ask the one question no one else did. "You ever think about what you want?" Max never had an answer. No one had ever asked before. The house was packed. Every room, every corner, every inch of space was filled with people laughing, drinking, and celebrating Ethan. The living room had been cleared out to make space for the massive banner hanging on the wall. "Congratulations, Ethan," in bold, blue and gold letters, the colors of his future college team. Tables overflowed with food, catered from the nicest restaurant in town. A slideshow played on the TV, a loop of Ethan's greatest moments on the field. His winning touchdowns, his newspaper headlines, his interviews. Max stood near the back, pressed against the wall, gripping a red plastic cup of watered-down soda. No one had said a word to him since he walked in. His parents had gone all out. The house looked like a scene from a movie, decorated with streamers, balloons, and framed photos of Ethan in his football uniform. Even the mayor had shown up, shaking hands with Ethan, laughing loudly like they were old friends. "This is only the beginning for you, son," someone cheered, clapping Ethan on the back. Max's stomach twisted. At one point, he tried to slip into the kitchen for a plate of food, but by the time he got there, most of the good stuff was gone. He grabbed a cold slider and picked at it, barely able to stomach it through the waves of resentment crashing over him. Then came the moment. Their father cleared his throat and raised his glass, calling for silence. "Everybody, quiet down. It's time." The room went still. Ethan stood in the center, grinning, surrounded by his teammates, his friends, their parents, their extended family. His mother wiped away happy tears. His father beamed with pride. "We couldn't be prouder of our boy," his father continued. "Ethan has worked so hard for this, and he deserves nothing but the best." Max already felt the weight in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the room flicking past him, over him, through him. He wasn't part of this moment, he never was. "And since Ethan is heading off to college soon," his father went on, dragging the words out, building anticipation, "we figured it was only right to give him something special to help him on this journey." Ethan's eyes sparkled. He knew what was coming. "Everybody, let's head outside." The crowd burst into cheers and applause as they surged toward the front door. Max moved with them, following along because what else could he do? He stepped out onto the driveway, blinking against the bright afternoon sun. And then he saw it. A brand new Jeep Wrangler sat in the driveway, gleaming in the sunlight, a giant red bow on the hood. It was black, Ethan's favorite color, with tinted windows and off-road tires. The reaction was deafening. "Oh my God!" Ethan shouted, running forward, running his hands over the hood like he couldn't believe it was real. His friends crowded around, whistling and clapping him on the back. "Man, this is sick. You're gonna look like a legend rolling up to campus in this. This is the best gift ever." Max swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. His father tossed Ethan the keys. "You earned it, son. Try it out," someone yelled. Ethan jumped into the driver's seat, revving the engine. The deep, powerful growl of the Jeep's motor sent another wave of cheers through the crowd. His mother was already snapping photos, their dad grinning from ear to ear. Max stood a few feet away, watching it all unfold, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his nails digging into his palms. Then, like an afterthought, his mother turned toward him. "Oh, Max honey, we didn't forget about you." She handed him a small white envelope. For a second, just a second, hope flickered inside of him. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally seen him. Maybe there was something in there that meant they cared. He opened it. Inside was a single scratch-off lottery ticket and a $25 gas card. That was it. A murmur of laughter spread through the crowd. Not outright cruel, but the kind of laughter that came from people who weren't sure if this was a joke or not. Someone muttered, "Well, hey, maybe you'll hit the jackpot." "Yeah, Max, you might be a millionaire after tonight," another voice chimed in. Ethan, still sitting in his new Jeep, turned and grinned. "Don't spend it all in one place, man." The laughter grew. Max's grip tightened around the envelope. His face burned. He could feel every set of eyes on him, not out of admiration like they looked at Ethan, but with pity. They were laughing at him. He was the punchline of a joke he hadn't even been told. His own father was smirking. His mother was already back to fussing over Ethan. Max had never felt smaller in his life. That night, after the party had died down and the house was finally quiet, Max lay on his bed, staring at the cheap lottery ticket between his fingers. The humiliation of the night still burned. The way everyone laughed, the way his parents had tossed him an afterthought of a gift while Ethan basked in his new Jeep. The way his own mother barely even looked at him after handing him the envelope, like she had already forgotten he existed. He had stuffed the ticket into his pocket and left the party as soon as he could, slipping upstairs while the celebration continued without him. From his bedroom window, he had watched Ethan and his friends pile into the Jeep, revving the engine and speeding off, music blasting, laughter echoing down the street. Max? He had gone unnoticed, forgotten, discarded. With a sigh, he pulled out his phone, opening the lottery app. He didn't even know why he was bothering. Maybe because, deep down, he wanted to prove how ridiculous the gift was. A useless scrap of paper. Something to keep him occupied while his brother drove off into his golden future. He scanned the ticket. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen refreshed, numbers flashing in bold. "Congratulations! You've won $7 million. Max blinked. His stomach twisted. His pulse thundered in his ears. 7 million. He sat up so fast his head spun. He stared at the screen, his hands gripping the phone so tightly his fingers ached. He read the number again, then again. But it didn't change. $7 million. A laugh almost bubbled up, but he swallowed it down. He had spent his entire life feeling like he was worth nothing, less than nothing. And now? Now he was holding enough money to change everything. He wasn't stupid. He knew what would happen if his family found out. His parents, who barely looked at him unless they needed something, would suddenly start paying attention. His father, who spent all his energy pushing Ethan toward greatness, would suddenly find time for his other son. His mother, who never forgot to pack Ethan's protein shakes but always forgot to ask if Max had eaten, would suddenly care. And Ethan? Ethan would think it was his too. He would smile that easy, charming smile and say something like, "Dude, we should split it. I mean, you wouldn't even have that ticket if it weren't for me, right?" And their parents would back him up. No. Max wasn't going to let that happen. He had always been invisible in this house, and now? Now, invisibility was his greatest weapon. His fingers shook as he locked his phone and slipped the ticket into the back of his wallet. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent hours researching how to claim winnings discreetly, how to set up a bank account in another town, how to hire a financial advisor without drawing attention. By morning, he had a plan. The next day, while his parents were still asleep and Ethan was out showing off his new Jeep, Max slipped out of the house. He took the bus to a bank 3 towns over, walking into the quiet, air-conditioned lobby like he belonged there. "Hi," he said to the teller, forcing his voice to stay steady. I'd like to open an account. She barely glanced at him as she handed over the paperwork. To her, he was just another nobody. A regular person. And that was exactly what he needed to be. He filled out everything carefully, making sure his parents' address wasn't listed anywhere. When she asked for a deposit, he pulled out a couple hundred from his own savings. Just enough to make it real. It wasn't much, not compared to what he would soon have, but it was the beginning of something. Afterward, he sat in a diner with a cheap cup of coffee, scrolling through his phone, looking up investment firms, real estate options, anything that would help him grow his money without flashing it around. This wasn't just about money. This was about freedom. This was about proving to himself that he wasn't just Ethan's shadow. For the first time in his life, Max had something that was entirely his, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. For the next few weeks, Max lived exactly as he always had. He still dragged himself to the warehouse every night, working grueling shifts unloading trucks and stacking heavy pallets. He still came home exhausted, ignored by his parents, unnoticed in his own house. He still listened to Ethan boast about his Jeep, his future, his golden life, and no one suspected a thing. The $7 million sat quietly in his new bank account, untouched except for small, carefully planned withdrawals that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. He had researched everything: taxes, investments, legal loopholes, and he knew exactly how to protect himself. But eventually, he allowed himself one indulgence: a Mustang GT. Midnight blue, with black rims and an engine that roared like thunder when he pressed the gas. It was his first taste of freedom. The moment he pulled into the driveway, tires crunching against the gravel, he knew he had made a mistake. Ethan was outside, polishing his Jeep, and when he turned to see the Mustang rolling in, his smile flickered. "Whoa," Ethan said, stepping closer, his brows knitting together. "Where the hell did you get this?" Max shrugged, keeping his expression neutral. "Saved up." Ethan scoffed. "From what? Your warehouse job?" "No way." Their parents had heard the engine, too, and now their father was stepping out onto the porch, frowning. Their mother followed, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Max?" she asked, looking from the car to him. "Whose is that?" "Mine." Their father folded his arms. "With what money?" Max could feel the heat creeping up his neck. He had been careful, so careful, but he had underestimated them. He had forgotten that, in their minds, he was supposed to be struggling, barely scraping by, the unimportant son. He wasn't supposed to have something nice. He forced another shrug. "Been saving for a while." Ethan snorted. "Bullshit." Max ignored him, walking past, heading toward the house. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his face blank. They couldn't prove anything. Not yet. But Ethan wasn't the type to let things go. Over the next few days, Max could feel the eyes on him. His father, watching him more closely. His mother, suddenly asking him questions she had never cared about before. And Ethan was everywhere, hovering, digging, waiting for Max to slip up. And then one night, it happened. Max had come home late from work, exhausted. He had tossed his jacket over the chair in the kitchen and gone upstairs to shower, not thinking twice about it. By the time he came back down, Ethan was sitting at the table, smirking. In front of him, spread out like evidence in a courtroom, were the financial documents Max had kept in his jacket pocket, statements from his new bank account, proof of the millions he had tried so hard to keep hidden. Max froze. "Wow," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair, hands behind his head. $7 million. Not bad for the family disappointment. Their parents were there, too. His mother's face was pale, her eyes wide. Their father looked stunned, but underneath it, there was something else. Calculation. "You won the lottery?" their father finally asked. Max didn't answer. His mother's voice was softer, almost shaky. "Max, why didn't you tell us?" Max let out a bitter laugh. "Why do you think?" Ethan held up one of the documents. "You were just gonna keep this all for yourself?" "Yeah," Max said coldly. "I was." His father's expression hardened. "That's not how this works." Max clenched his jaw. "What does that mean?" His mother stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Honey, we bought that ticket. That means the money belongs to the family." Max felt something snap inside of him. He had expected them to be angry. He had expected them to be shocked. But this? This was worse. This wasn't just about the money. This was about control. He had never been anything to them. And now, the moment he had something, the moment he had worth in their eyes, they wanted to claim it as their own. Max's hands curled into fists. "You bought the ticket," he repeated, voice low. "And let me guess, you bought Ethan that Jeep, so that belongs to the family too, right?" Their mother flinched. "That's different." "How?" Max snapped. Because it was for Ethan? Because he deserves it more. His father's expression darkened. We have supported you your entire life, Max. Max laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. Supported me? You ignored me. You treated me like I wasn't even here. The only reason you care now is because I have something you want. Ethan shook his head, looking amused. Man, you're acting like some kind of victim. Max turned on him, his anger boiling over. You don't get to talk to me about that. You got everything. The attention, the praise, the car. And what did I get? He held up the lottery ticket. A joke. A lottery ticket and a $25 gas card. That's what I was worth to you. The room was silent. Max's father's jaw tightened. We're family, Max. Yeah, Max said, stepping back. We are. And that's exactly why I'm not giving you a damn dime. Their mother gasped. Max! But he was already walking away. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just Ethan's shadow. He was something more. And he wasn't about to let them take it away from him. Max stood in the living room, his fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. His father's glare burned into him, his face red with barely contained rage. His mother looked shocked, her hands trembling, while Ethan just sat there, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, like he was enjoying the show. You're being selfish, his father spat. We are your family. You don't turn your back on family. Max let out a hollow laugh. Oh, now I'm part of the family? That's funny. You sure didn't seem to care when I was breaking my back at the warehouse while you were busy buying Ethan a brand new Jeep. His father's expression twisted in fury. We bought that ticket. That money belongs to us. Max shook his head. No. That money is mine. His father's face darkened, and then the words came, sharp as a knife. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. The air in the room went still. His mother gasped. Ethan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Max exhaled slowly, feeling something inside him settle. Fine. His mother made a strangled noise. Max, no. But he didn't stay to listen. He turned, walked up the stairs, and packed everything that mattered to him, which wasn't much. A duffel bag of clothes, his laptop, his wallet, his phone. He paused by the window, looking out at Ethan's Jeep parked in the driveway, gleaming under the streetlights. That Jeep had been handed to Ethan, just like everything else. Max had built his own future. When he came back down the stairs, his father was still standing there, his arms crossed. His mother had tears in her eyes. You're making a mistake, she whispered. Max met her gaze. No. I'm finally doing something right. And with that, he walked out the door. He didn't look back. That night, Max rented an apartment. It wasn't anything fancy. A one-bedroom in a quiet part of town, far enough away that he didn't have to worry about running into his family. But it was his. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like an afterthought. The silence was different here. At home, silence had meant being ignored, forgotten. Here, it meant peace. He collapsed onto the bare mattress he had just bought, staring at the ceiling, letting everything sink in. He was free. Over the next few months, Max got to work. He had already done his research, already set up his accounts, already planned his next move. Now, it was time to put them into action. He hired a financial advisor. Someone sharp, discreet, someone who knew how to make money grow without drawing attention. He diversified his investments, put money into real estate, stocks, and tech startup. And it worked. Slowly, steadily, his fortune grew. He still kept his warehouse job for a while, just to avoid suspicion. But eventually, he quit. He didn't need it anymore. Now, when he woke up, he didn't feel dread pressing down on him. He felt power. He felt control. And for the first time, he let himself enjoy life. That was how he met Kate. She was nothing like the people he had grown up around. Sharp, independent, and completely unimpressed by wealth. She was 22, studying economics, juggling 2 jobs and school like it was nothing. Max met her at a bookstore, of all places. He had been browsing aimlessly, just trying to kill time, when she had brushed past him, muttering something about idiots who put business books in the wrong section. He had laughed before he even realized it. Kate had turned, raising an eyebrow. You think something's funny? Max had grinned. You're yelling at bookshelves. She had stared at him for a long second, then smirked. Fair point. That was how it started. She didn't care about his money. She didn't ask what he did for a living, didn't try to dig into his past. She liked him for who he was now, not who he used to be. And Max found himself liking her more than he thought possible. With Kate, he wasn't invisible. He was seen. Meanwhile, things weren't going so well for Ethan. It had started as a rumor, whispers around town, little murmurs about how Ethan had wrecked his Jeep. Max didn't believe it until he saw it for himself. One afternoon, while driving through town in his Mustang, he spotted Ethan standing in a gas station parking lot. But there was no Jeep. Just a mangled wreck, a twisted mess of metal being loaded onto a tow truck. Ethan was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, looking furious. Max pulled over, lowering his window. "Hey little bro. What happened?" Ethan turned, and for the first time in his life, Max saw something unfamiliar in his brother's eyes. Panic. Ethan had always been untouchable. Always had everything handed to him. But now, he looked like a man who had finally realized he wasn't invincible. "None of your damn business," Ethan snapped. Max just smirked. Later, he found out the full story. Ethan had been showing off, racing his Jeep against some other guys trying to impress a girl. He had lost control, flipped the car, and totaled it. And because of that, his scholarship was gone. Turns out, his college wasn't too keen on giving free rides to reckless idiots who endangered themselves and others. And without football, Ethan had nothing. Their parents were struggling too. Without Ethan's scholarship, they suddenly had to figure out how to pay for his tuition. The problem? They couldn't. They had spent so much money on Ethan's training, on his car, on making sure he had the best of everything. And now they had nothing left. Max wasn't sure when the first call came, but when he saw his father's name on his phone screen, he just stared at it. He didn't answer. He let it ring. Then, when it stopped, a message popped up. "We need to talk." Max smirked. No, they didn't. For the first time in his life, Max had everything he needed. And for the first time, his family was learning what it felt like to be ignored. A year had passed. Max barely thought about them anymore. His life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. His investments had flourished, turning his already massive fortune into something even bigger. He had multiple properties now, his apartment in the city, a lake house where he and Kate spent weekends, and a small investment property he was renting out. He had a portfolio filled with stocks, tech startups, and high-yield accounts that worked for him while he lived his life. And best of all, he was free. No more late-night warehouse shift. No more being overlooked at the dinner table. No more being Ethan's shadow. He had built something real. Something that was his. Meanwhile, Ethan was working construction. Max had heard about it through mutual acquaintances, how the golden boy of their small town had fallen. How, without his football scholarship, he had dropped out of college after one semester. How, with no degree, no backup plan, and no one to bail him out, he had ended up doing hard labor just to keep himself afloat. And their parents? They were drowning. They had spent everything on Ethan's dream. The expensive training, the Jeep, the endless stream of new cleats and gear and out-of-state tournaments. And when it all came crashing down, they had nothing left. The mortgage was behind. Credit card debt piled up. Their carefully constructed illusion of being the perfect football family had shattered, leaving them with nothing but regret and bills they couldn't pay. That was when the calls started. At first, it was just one or two. Max would glance at his phone, see his father's name, and ignore it. Then his mother started calling. Then Ethan. Then both of them. Voicemail after voicemail. "Max honey, we just wanted to check in. Give us a call back. Son, we need to talk. It's important. Bro, come on. Don't be like this. Just call me back." Then, the messages changed. His father's voice, tight with barely concealed frustration. "I don't know what kind of grudge you're holding, but this is ridiculous. We're family." His mother, teary and desperate. "Max, please. Things are bad right now. We just need a little help." Ethan, his usual arrogance cracked with something new, panic. "Dude, you can't just ignore us. Mom and Dad are screwed, and I'm working my ass off just to pay rent. You're sitting on millions, and you're just gonna let us struggle?" Max sat back in his office chair, scrolling through the endless missed calls, the guilt-tripping messages, the growing desperation. And he felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No desire to pick up the phone and rescue them. For years, he had been nothing to them. An afterthought. A shadow. The only time they had truly seen him was when they wanted something. Now that they needed him, they suddenly remembered he existed. He deleted the messages. A few weeks later, there was a knock at his door. Max frowned. Almost no one knew where he lived, he had made sure of that. When he opened it, his grandfather stood there. His heart clenched for a brief second. Of all the people in his family, Grandpa had been the only one who had ever truly cared. He was the only one who had ever seen Max, not just as Ethan's brother, not as an afterthought, but as his own person. "Grandpa," Max said, stepping aside. "Come in." The old man walked in slowly, his cane tapping against the hardwood floor. He took a seat at the kitchen table, looking around the sleek, modern apartment. You've done well for yourself, he said finally, nodding in approval. Max shrugged, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Guess so. His grandfather took a sip, then sighed, setting the cup down. Your father's a proud man. But I think this is the first time in his life he's realizing he's not in control. Max leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He called you? Grandpa snorted. Begged me to talk some sense into you. Max smirked. Did you come here to do that? His grandfather shook his head. No. I came to tell you something. There was a long pause, the weight of whatever was coming settling between them. Then, Grandpa met his eyes. I bought that lottery ticket, he said. Max's breath caught. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared at his grandfather, trying to process the words. Grandpa nodded, as if confirming what Max was already thinking. I knew your parents would never give you what you deserved, the old man continued. I watched for years as they poured everything into Ethan, acting like you weren't even there. And I knew, one day, you'd either get stuck in their cycle or find a way out. Max's mouth was dry. So, you bought the ticket for me? His grandfather nodded. I figured if anyone deserved a shot at something better, it was you. Max sat down heavily. He didn't know what he had expected to feel. Anger? Resentment? Instead, all he felt was relief. Because even if his parents had never seen him, even if Ethan had always overshadowed him, someone had believed in him. You don't owe them anything, his grandfather said firmly. They chose Ethan. Over and over again. Let them live with the consequences. Max nodded slowly. I know. His grandfather smiled. Good. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then, Max took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time, he wasn't living in Ethan's shadow. He had built his own life, and he had done it on his own terms.